There have been many archetypes in the history of Yu-Gi-Oh! That have seen competitive play, and generally, the larger the archetype, the more of an impact it will have on the game. It's just a numbers game. The more cards in an archetype, the more likely at least one of them finds a home. However, that's not always the case. And today, we're going to be looking at archetypes that defied the odds, whose members were able to find success despite their low numbers. And starting us off at number 10, we have Lyrilusc. This is a deck built around swarming the board with level 1 Wing Beast monsters, and using them to summon various rank 1 Xyz monsters. These rank 1 monsters gain attack based on the number of Xyz materials they have, and have a variety of effects built around swarming the board and dealing a lot of damage. The entire archetype clocks in at a concise 14 cards, which, while not tiny, is still one of the smaller archetypes around. Lyrilusc on its own hasn't been that successful. While the like of Turquoise Warbler and Sapphire Swallow allow the deck to swarm the board quite effectively, their payoffs just aren't powerful enough on their own, and the deck uses up a lot of resources making its Xyz monsters. Of course, the phrase alone is important here, as the deck has found success as an engine to help out other strategies. The Xyz monster, Lyrilusc Recitaling Starling, can add any level 1 Wing Beast monster from your deck to your hand, and can be made easily with the Lyrilusc cards, and often without using up your normal summon. As a result, decks like Tri-Brigade have used the engine to add Tri-Brigade Nerval from their deck to their hand, and engines that end up leaving a lot of level 1 monsters around like Spyro and Quick Fix have splashed the card in their extra deck just to add DD Crow as part of their combo. This little engine isn't the only thing the deck has going for it though, as they also received a Lyrilusc Independent Nightingale, a fusion monster that has only ever caused problems since its release. This fusion monster has the effect where it gains attack equal to 500 times its level, and once per turn, it can inflict damage to your opponent equal to its level times 500. The issue arises when players use cards like Wind Witch Crystal Bell and 100 Eyes Dragon to copy Independent Nightingale's effect. Note that 100 Eyes Dragon has to go through Phantom of Chaos to accomplish this. Since these cards have much higher levels than Nightingale does, they can burn the opponent for up to 4,000 damage with a single activation. By going through a few of these monsters in a single combo, you can FTK your opponent. As a result of this FTK, many cards have had to be banned, though Independent Nightingale is, for some reason, not one of them. So, while Lyrilusc hasn't been the most successful deck ever, a surprisingly high number of the 14 cards in the archetype have actually made a splash in competitive play. And at number 9, we have the Dragon Rulers. This is a unique archetype consisting of a few cycles of cards. First, there's the Dragon Rulers themselves, Blaster, Tidal, Tempest, and Redox. These are level 7 dragon monsters with different attributes that each have a few shared effects. They can special summon themselves from the hand or graveyard by banishing 2 dragon monsters and or monsters of their attribute, but during the opponent's end phase, they bounce back to your hand if they were special summoned. They have a unique effect to them that you can use by discarding them and another monster of their attribute. And finally, if they're banished, you can add a dragon monster of their attribute from your deck to your hand. Then you have the Baby Rulers, Stream, Burner, Lightning, and Reacton. These are all level 4 lore dragon monsters with the effect where you can discard them and a dragon monster or a monster of their attribute to summon the larger dragon ruler of their attribute from your deck, but they can't attack this turn. These 8 cards form the backbone of one of the most dominant Tier 0 decks the game has ever seen, only kept in check by the power of Spellbook of Judgment, barely making it a 2-deck format. The Dragon Rulers allow the deck to make a ton of rank 7s very easily, swarming the board with Big Eyes and Mecha Phantom Beast Dracosax, and then coming back to generate even more value over the course of future turns. Each of the Dragon Rulers were so individually powerful that they all ended up on the ban list, only recently finally being released back into the TCG. Honestly, these are the only important cards in the deck, as the future support hasn't really propelled them back into relevance. Nebulous, Dragon Ruler of Mishaps, Spectral, Dragon Ruler of Flickers, and Here There Be Dragons were designed to give them more consistency, and the cards Chasma, Dragon Ruler of Auroras, Eclipse, Dragon Ruler of Catastrophes, and Disaster, Dragon Ruler of All Apocalypses are the deck's new and improved boss monsters, giving them interaction designed to keep up in the modern day. And as neat as all that is, it really doesn't matter. Their discard inherents to the archetype are just too much of a downside nowadays, and even Super Rejuvenation's draws can't offset that many discards in a single turn. Still, with 8 cards being meta warping in a 14-card archetype, the Dragon Rulers may have the highest ratio of meta cards of almost any archetype in Yu-Gi-Oh! And at number 8, we have Horus. The Horus archetype is generally split into two groups. First, we have the 5 cards in its original run, centering around Horus, the Black Flame Dragon level 8, as well as its warped version, Metaphys Horus, a part of the Metaphys archetype. The original Horus cards were built around Horus himself and his level line. Low-level monsters are an old mechanic that mostly failed for a variety of reasons we covered a while back. But the Horus line proved to be better than the majority of its ilk for a simple reason. It didn't have to play by the level mechanics rules most of the time. Unlike many other larger level monsters, Horus level 6 didn't have to be summoned by his lower level versions. Instead, it could simply be tribute summoned to the field, immediately giving you a 2300 attack monster that was unaffected by spell effects, which was very powerful back in the day. A very common way to deal with problematic monsters back in the day was spell cards like Fissure and Dark Hole, as they were some of the most flexible and low-cost removal in the format. Being immune to these effects was quite good, and if you were okay with playing a Brink in your deck, you could run Horus the Black Flame Dragon level 8. This could negate any number of spell cards in a single turn, a very powerful effect even to this day. Despite this strength, the inherent downsides of both the level archetype and tribute monsters kept Horus from being particularly successful for most of its lifespan. What we're really here for is the second wave of Horus cards, all centered around King Sarcophagus. This continuous spell has the effect where, up to 4 times per turn, you can send a card from your hand to the graveyard to send a Horus monster from your deck to the graveyard. The targets for this are the new suite of Horus monsters, Duamutef, Hoppy, Imseti, and Cubicenif. Each of these monsters can summon themselves back from the graveyard once per turn if you have King Sarcophagus on the field. And they all have an effect when either they or another one of their monsters leaves the field thanks to your opponent. These are meant to help summon out the new version of Horus, but people just didn't really bother with that. They just jammed the Horus monsters and Sarcophagus into a deck and used them to turn dead cards in hand into more materials for summon that could come back every turn. And this was incredibly powerful. These monsters made summoning giant rank 8s like Coach King Giant Trainer and the Zombie Vampire easy, letting players perform massive, long combos of uninterrupted. This was still quite costly in terms of cards in hand, and eventually players found greener pastures to move on to. That doesn't change the amount of plays the Horus engine saw when it was first introduced into the game, and the huge competitive splash it had. Horus slides in with another 14 cards, tying with the last 2 spots on this list, and somehow tying with the number 6 spot on this list as well. And at number 7, we have the Invoked archetype. This is a very simple archetype based around one powerful resource loop. Magical Meltdown adds Alistair the Invoker from your deck to your hand when it's activated. Alistair himself has an effect where, when he's normal summoned or flip face up, you can add Invocation from your deck to your hand. This normal spell allows you to fusion summon a monster using monsters from your hand as materials, or by banishing monsters from your field or either graveyard if you're summoning an invoked monster. While it's in your graveyard, you can target a banished Alistair, add that back to your hand, then shuffle this into your deck. The game plan here is quite straightforward. You summon Alistair, get Invocation, use Alistair's materials for an invoked monster, then add back your Alistair to do it again next turn. The simplicity of the game plan is matched only by how effective it is. There are a ton of great invoked monsters to summon. Invoked Caliga floodgates monsters to only 1 monster effect each turn, Invoked Mechaba can negate your opponent's cards, Invoked Aguidus can destroy your opponent's monsters, and so on and so on. Thanks to how concise and powerful the engine is, it can be splashed into a number of other strategies. Decks such as Shaddolls or Mech Knights played a concise Invoke package to give their strategy more power without sacrificing too many deck slots. The only reason this incredibly concise engine even has 14 cards is thanks to the variety of fusion monsters it has, as well as the future support it received. If we were only looking at the first wave of the deck, it would be an even smaller archetype. Unfortunately, that's not quite how this list works. So the Invoked archetype is stuck with a score of 14 total cards. And at number 6, we have the Millennium archetype. This is a strange archetype, as the number of cards in this archetype depends greatly on how you want to count them. The main thing this archetype refers to is the Millennium Ankh deck, designed around summoning the unstoppable Exodia Incarnate. In total, there are 9 of these Millennium cards. However, these cards also need the Exodia pieces to complete their game plan, thanks to how Millennium Ankh works. On top of that, the unstoppable Exodia Incarnate also interacts with a few particular spell and trap cards. So if you add those cards in as part of this archetype rather than as part of the connected Exodia archetype, that means we go from 9 to 18 cards. However, that's not the end of the weird corner cases here, as there are a lot of other cards that are technically Millennium cards that most people wouldn't consider a part of the archetype. First, we have a few normal monsters that are admittedly pretty cool, but aren't really a part of the deck's game plan. Then we have Millennium Eyes Illusionist and Millennium Eyes Restrict, which are Thousand Eyes Restrict support, so not really part of the same archetype. Then there's Millennium Revelation and Millennium Seeker, which are Egyptian god support. Finally, there's Millennium Scorpion, a completely unrelated card that just happens to have Millennium in its name. If you include every card with the word Millennium in the archetype, there are 16 cards in the archetype. But if you only include the cards that are part of the strategy, it's anywhere between 9 and 18 cards based on where you draw the line between the Millennium archetype and the Exodia archetype. We're going with a somewhat conservative 13 cards for this list, including the 9 Millennium cards, the Unstoppable Exodia Incarnate, and the 3 spell trap cards it can search out. Anyway, turning to what these cards actually do, the Millennium engine proved to be strong in a couple of scenarios. Actually trying to summon the Unstoppable Exodia is an alright strategy, by which we mean if a Millennium Ankh resolves, you probably win the game, and if it doesn't, you instantly lose. The Millennium cards have had success outside this role though, as they are giant monsters that can easily swarm the field without using your normal summon if you're willing to pay 2000 life points a few times. A small engine of Golem that guards the Millennium treasures, Sengenjin wakes from a Millennium, and Wedju Temple gives decks the ability to spam the boards with these massive monsters, contributing to powerful combos. While the exact number of cards in the archetype is debatable, the power of the Millennium strategy certainly isn't. And at number 5, we have Star-Seraph. This is an archetype built around summoning the Xyz monster, number 102 Star-Seraph Sentry, as well as other useful rank 4 Xyz monsters. The entire archetype clocks in at only 8 cards, with 6 of them being main deck monsters, and 2 of them being extra deck monsters. Of these cards, most of them are mediocre to bad. Cards like Star-Seraph Sword and Star-Seraph Sage aren't particularly powerful cards, requiring you to pitch cards in your hand for fairly mediocre effects. However, there are a couple of cards from this archetype that have managed to actually have an impact on the game, even if the rest of the archetype is pretty bad. Star-Seraph Scepter and Star-Seraph Sovereign are 2 that stand out from the archetype. Scepter adds any Star-Seraph card from your deck to your hand on summon, and Sovereign can special summon itself from your hand when you normal or special summon a Star-Seraph monster, and then you can draw a card. Normal summoning Scepter with a Sovereign in hand generates a full 2 cards of advantage, and while Sovereign can't be used to summon a rank 4 unless you use at least 3 different monsters as materials, they can be used as materials for literally anything else. Some decks have used them as materials for ritual summons, while others double down on swarming the board with level 4s to make more costly rank 4s. Regardless of the exact way they were used, this little 2-card engine could lead to massive high rolls and extremely explosive plays. And at number 4, we have the Impcantations. These are a set of ritual support cards designed to help other ritual decks perform their summons more consistently. There are 4 Impcantation non-ritual monsters, each of which shares a few things. All of these monsters can special summon themselves from your hand and another Impcantation monster from your deck by revealing either a ritual spell or ritual monster from your hand. They also all have an effect when they're summoned from the deck, most of which center around adding ritual spells or monsters from your deck or graveyard to your hand. The deck also has Impcantation Chalice Slime, a ritual monster with the effect where, while it's in your hand, you can discard a card to special summon any Impcantation monster from your deck. With these 5 monsters in your deck, you can quite easily find the ritual materials for just about any strategy. The Impcantations do have some downsides, namely that while they're face up on your field, they prevent you from special summoning from the extra deck. As a result, the deck that most often plays the Impcantations are ritual strategies that don't utilize their extra decks, or that can easily get rid of the Impcantations gumming up their board. For example, Necros, Xenobirds, and Megalith decks have all made use of the Impcantations at certain points, and all to great effect. For an archetype consisting of only 8 cards, the Impcantations pack quite a punch. And at number 3, we have the Nimble archetype. This is another archetype with a debatable amount of members, as you could argue there are as few as 2 members of this archetype, or as many as 7. The 2 poster childs for the archetype are Nimble Beaver and Nimble Angler. Beaver is a level 2 water monster with the effect where on normal summon, you can special summon a level 3 or lower Nimble monster from your deck or graveyard. Angler is a level 2 water monster with the effect where if it's sent from your hand or deck to the graveyard, you can special summon 2 level 3 or lower Nimble monsters from your deck, except itself. These 2 cards were used in Sprite List as ways to get 2 level 2 monsters on board easily. Summoning a beaver can allow you to instantly go into a gigantic sprite, letting you access the sprite engine instantly. Angler is also a prime target to send off the effect of Sprite Sprint, giving you 2 more level 2 monsters to use as Link or Xyz materials for further extension. In addition to these more popular Nimble monsters, there are a few more that synergize with them. For example, Nimble Sunfish and Nimble Bonta. Sunfish is a level 2 water monster with the effect where if it's destroyed by battle and sent to the grave, you can send a fish from your deck to the graveyard, then special summon a sunfish from your deck. Bonta is a level 2 water monster with the effect where if it's sent from the field to the graveyard by a card effect, you can special summon any number of Bontas from your deck. Sunfish is a way for the deck to send Angler from your deck to the graveyard, allowing you to summon more Nimble monsters directly from the deck. These 4 cards compose what would normally be understood as the Nimble archetype, but there are 3 cards that are technically Nimble cards as well. First is Nimble Momonga and Nimble Musabi, which are level 2 Earth Beast monsters that share the effect to summon 2 copies of themselves from your deck when destroyed by battle. However, Musabi summons those monsters to your opponent's field, while Momonga summons them to your field. Finally, we have Super Nimble Mega Hamster, which has no synergies with the rest of the archetype, nor bears any resemblance to them. This is a level 4 flip monster with the effect on flip summon to summon a level 3 or lower beast monster from your deck in face down defense position. This was mostly used in the Synchro era to summon Raikou, as Raikou was just one of the best normal summons of the format at the time. While the context surrounding them has been different, having 4 of the 7 cards in this small pseudo-archetype having seen competitive play is quite the record, especially considering that many players may not even be aware of the archetype's existence at all. And at number 2, we have the Elder, Outer, and Old Entity archetype. This is an archetype built around the, in part, spell card Forbidden Trapezohedron. This normal spell card has the effect where, if you control monsters of exactly 2 of these types, being Fusion, Xyz, and Synchro, then you apply the following effect based on what monsters you control. If you control a Fusion and a Synchro monster, you summon an Outer Entity monster from your extra deck and attach the spell card to it as an Xyz material. If you have a Synchro and an Xyz, you summon an Elder Entity monster from your extra deck. Finally, if you control an Xyz and a Fusion, you summon an Old Entity monster. This spell card hasn't actually done all that much, and the Old Entity monsters haven't done that much either. However, the rest of the cards in the archetype have proven themselves to be very powerful. Elder Entity Norden was played heavily alongside the card Instant Fusion, which instantly summons a level 5 or lower fusion monster from your extra deck, but it's destroyed during the end phase. Norden allows you to reborn a level 4 or lower monster from your graveyard when it's special summoned, but it does negate its effects and banish it when it would leave the field. By targeting another level 4 monster, you can instantly rank these up into a rank 4, making this a 1-card rank 4 with very little setup. This is only one application of the card though, as it can also be used to make easy synchro monsters and the like. The use case of Norden not only with instant fusion, but even with decks with easy access to fusion summoning, ended up being simply too much, leading to the card's ban. Natis was used in an entirely different way. Many cards, such as Ultimate Slayer and Dogmatic of Punishment, can send monsters from your extra deck to the graveyard to activate their effects. Natis allows you to target a card on the field and destroy it when it's sent to the graveyard from anywhere, allowing it to play extremely well with both of these cards. The last card from this archetype that made a big splash in competitive play was also the most terrifying, that being Outer Entity Azathoth. This card has one simple effect that makes it completely game-breaking. The turn that it's Xyz summoned, your opponent can't activate any monster effects, regardless of whose turn it is. If you can find a way to summon Azathoth on your opponent's turn, they just don't get to play the game. Players found methods to do this with cards like the Phantom Knight's Rank Up Magic Force to rank up into Azathoth on your opponent's turn, essentially winning the game on the spot. This also led to Azathoth getting banned, the second card from the second card archetype to be put on the ban list. Once again, this is an archetype small enough that many players may not even recognize it as an archetype that managed to have a huge impact on competitive play. And at number 1, we have the Goyo archetype. This is honestly hardly even an archetype. This is a series of 6 monsters, 5 Earth Warrior Synchro monsters, and 1 Earth Warrior Fusion monster, mostly built around summoning your opponent's monsters to your field. This is one of those archetypes that was invented after a random card became famous, in this case Goyo Guardian. This was one of the first synchro monsters released into the game, and it immediately made a name for itself. This level 6 synchro monster originally could be summoned with any tuner and any non-tuner monster, had a monstrous 2800 attack, and could special summon any monster destroyed by battle to your field in defense position. This was a huge power outlier amongst synchro monsters, even ones that quickly proved themselves to be game warping on their own right. Guardian could beat over higher level synchro monsters such as Stardust Dragon and Black Rose Dragon in battle, having a much higher attack stat than most of the level 6 synchro monsters. On top of that, stealing any monster it beats in battle is a massive swing both in terms of tempo and card advantage, turning the tide of the game in a single battle phase. The power of Goyo was so vast that it ended up being banned, before eventually being eroded into an unusable state as it now requires an Earth Tuner monster to summon. This was a completely unnecessary nerf to the card that happened long after it would have been good in the first place. A small time after Goyo was unbanned, the rest of the support would come out, and most of it wouldn't have that much of an impact. However, one of the cards did manage to find success in competitive, specifically Goyo Defender. This is a level 3 Earth Warrior synchro monster with the effect where, if all monsters you control are Earth Warrior synchro monsters, you can summon this card from your extra deck. This means that if you make a Goyo Defender on an otherwise empty board, you can summon both other defenders from the extra deck, giving you 3 level 3 monsters to use as materials for future plays. Right before Master Rule 4 was put into effect, this was a popular way to make a ton of rank 3 monsters. Infernoid decks briefly use this as a way to summon Dante or Levier to extend their combos even further, while also leaving an extra level 3 body on the board. However, Master Rule 4 quickly made use for this card moot, and then by the time Master Rule 5 came around, this strategy simply wasn't that impressive anymore. Still, that does mean that 2 of the 6 members of the Goyo archetype did see competitive play, making it a surprisingly successful archetype considering that most people probably forgot all about it.